Did you know that just last year, the wearable device market brought in over $30 billion? And do you know what one of the biggest selling points for wearable devices is? And I'm talking about things like Fitbit, Apple Watches. It's tracking. Tracking things like number of steps taken, number of calories burned, resting heart rate, exercise, food or water intake, sleep, and more. In other words, countless people around the world are spending money on devices that give them actionable feedback. Actionable feedback, which allows them to change or improve their lives in some way. If you want to lose weight, you can use a device to track calories consumed and expended. All you need from there is some simple math to tell you how much more exercise you need, or how many fewer calories will help you lose the extra weight. If you want to perform better at work or with critical thinking, and your wearable device gives you feedback showing you how poor your sleep is, all it might take is a calming bedtime routine to start seeing better results. Now, can those same results be achieved without a tracking device? Sure. I mean, lots of people were able to lose weight and get adequate sleep before FitBits came along, right? But I can guarantee you, having actionable insights right on your phone to help you pinpoint changes you need to make in order to reach your specific goals makes it a heck of a lot easier. To put it simply, feedback is a lifeline when it comes to seeing success. And I'm not just talking about success with your health. Your app can grow and thrive with the right feedback too. In fact, if accelerated success is important to you with your app, getting the right feedback on your app at the right time is critical. I'm Kristen Young's co-founder of Coaching No Code Apps, where we help founders build custom apps to start or scale their businesses. Today, we're going to cover exactly why you must have feedback loops in place all throughout development, plus how to do them right so you don't waste all your time. Let's dive right in. So, what exactly is a feedback loop? Essentially, a feedback loop provides a way for you to test a certain component of your app, study the data and results you receive, and make improvements based on those results. Just like a smartwatch can tell you to exercise more if you want to lose weight, a feedback loop with your app can give you actionable advice on how to reach your own specific goals. They're critical to the long-term success of your app. But here's the thing. Getting feedback on your app isn't necessarily a new concept, right? Pretty much everyone building an app knows at some point they're going to bring users on board. And at that point, there will probably need to be changes made to the app. The problem is most people building apps don't have a straightforward plan to follow in order to not only get the information they need to make the changes, but to also make the changes themselves in an efficient and strategic way. All right, a properly constructed feedback loop solves that. So how do you correctly set up feedback loops for your app? So let's start by thinking big and then working our way back down. Eric Ries, the author of the Lean Startup, preaches the build, measure, learn concept, which helps founders move through development quickly and strategically. Here's a breakdown. So first, you build. You start by creating the initial concept or product that you want to test. Now, this might be your MVP app, for example, your minimum viable product or your first version. And then you move on to the measure part of the cycle. So once you've created the initial version of your app, then you move into the measure phase, which in reality can exist in a lot of different shapes and forms. So measuring is essentially a way of gathering your feedback, and the way you go about this will really depend on how you're building your app and who you're building it for. So for example, one founder might be building an app to use inside their own business, right? Maybe it replaces a few software programs they currently use. And then they might be planning to sell it to other businesses like theirs down the road. Now, in this case, the founder might measure by creating something as simple as a spreadsheet to use during testing, where they can record all their relevant data points and responses. Now, another example might be a founder who's building an app for their industry. They might have a group of initial test users record feedback in a similar spreadsheet to the founder we just talked about. And in reality, the initial test users could be themselves. But then when they take the next steps and onboard a group of external beta users, they might send out surveys or schedule phone calls or even measure via email conversations. And then once those founders have gathered their feedback and data, it's time to learn. Or in other words, find trends. And these can be both positive and negative. Now, this part is pretty simple. Number one, you want to be open to feedback, both good and bad. And number two, once you have it, you need to use it to improve your app. All right. And then this takes you back to that initial build phase, and the cycle can continue indefinitely from there. Now, a lot of founders know they need to get feedback, which is great, but the majority tend to overlook the most important components of the feedback loops themselves. See, most founders jump straight into tracking metrics, things like user count, retention rates, opt-ins, page visits, traffic, drop-off rates, and more. And while these metrics or KPIs, or key performance indicators, can be important, they're often not critical to the initial feedback loops themselves. See, many of those metrics or KPIs are what are called vanity metrics. They're numbers that make you feel good, but that might not really be useful in any way. So, for example, if you have 10 times more users sign up for your app than you were originally hoping for, you might think you've hit massive success early on. But if 95% of those users are then turning around and leaving right after they've been onboarded, but let's say you're not getting the feedback you need in order to pinpoint why they're leaving, that success you thought you had wouldn't actually be real, right? The number might make you feel good. It might look and sound good, but it wouldn't actually impact you in any substantial way. And worse, without knowing why users were turning around and leaving, there'd be no way to figure out where to make changes and improvements to your app without relying on guesswork. Now, with that in mind, the absolute most important part of a successful feedback loop is your goals. See, the feedback you track and gather must be directly related to your goals. If it's not, you won't be able to use it. That means the most important thing you can do right away is get clear on your goals if you haven't already done so. Now, this involves a few different steps. The first is to identify your current phase of development. Are you in the very initial stages where you're simply trying to gather feedback to validate your idea? Are you testing the first version of the app itself? Are you preparing for your first beta group? Have you completed beta testing and are now in a rollout phase? See, each stage of development should have a different goal. So if you don't know which one you're in, you need to figure that out first. And then you need to focus on the problem you're solving. When you move on to the next phase, the actual problem you're solving is vital to have pinpointed. So let's say you're building the first version of your app, and you'll be onboarding a small group of initial test users before going into an official beta testing phase. Now, in that case, your specific goal might be to get feedback on the actual functionality of your core features only. And I'm talking about the ones that are vital to solving the problem that your app is even being built to solve, right? So you may only be testing to make sure the app actually works before bringing on beta users to test other things like effectiveness or experience. Or maybe you've already gone through the initial testing phase and have confirmed everything works, and now you're bringing on a group of, let's say, 30 beta users to adopt the app for a full month. Now, in that case, let's say that your app removes a handful of manual processes for businesses in a certain industry. All right, we'll use that as an example. If the time-consuming or tedious manual processes are what your app is being built to solve, then your goal might be to gauge how much time your app saves your beta users on average, or how much human error it removes compared to doing the same work manually. The point is to be as specific as you can. See, a lot of founders ask vague questions when trying to get feedback, like whether users enjoy their experience on the app and what they think the design is like, or how much they like using the app. But none of those answers will allow them to make any strategic changes. Now, if, on the other hand, you can gather feedback on how effective the app is at solving the problem it's being designed to solve, then you can make smart and pinpointed improvements. All right, identify the problem you're solving based on the specific stage of development you're currently in, and then identify the goal. The feedback you gather should connect those two things. Next, let's talk about how to implement your feedback loops in the right way. We really frequently use the words strategic and efficient because a lot of founders spin their wheels when it comes to building their apps. They have vague goals, unclear directions, and no solid framework to follow. And this leads to half-built apps or broken apps, or apps that take 10 times longer than they should to build. But just as there are specific ways in which you can strategically and efficiently build your app itself, you can do the same with your feedback loops. Now, there are 3 key points to remember when implementing your feedback loops. The first is to plan ahead. Each phase of your development will call for different types of feedback, different testing atmospheres, and different goals. So plan out how you'll implement and use feedback loops in each stage before you get there. For example, our Built to Scale members develop their MVP apps, or their minimum viable products, or their first versions with us, in order to get feedback on the actual functionality so they can then start enhancing the app from there. But before they actually start moving into their initial testing phases, they set up a project management board for gathering and organizing feedback. And they also have crystal clear goals and solutions pre-planned. All they have to do is use those assets to move forward efficiently into their app's next stages. Now, likewise, if you are planning to bring beta users on board, you'd want to identify your goals and methods for gathering feedback before actually having them come onto the app. And that way, you'd be able to make quick changes and give your beta users a good experience, which will in turn give you better feedback. And next, you want to identify the symptoms to diagnose the problem. So as you gather feedback, you'll be looking for trends, issues, and errors. And remember, any negative or constructive feedback you get is a symptom of an underlying problem. Okay, I'm going to say that again. It's a symptom of an underlying problem. Now, in the previous example of the app that was being built to remove those business owners' manual processes, let's say the feedback showed that half of the beta users actually spent more time going through those manual or those processes using the app than they would have if they had done them manually. Now, that extra time would be a symptom, and it would be your job to diagnose the root problem. So in this case, maybe users simply needed a more robust onboarding sequence, and the extra time they spent on the app was just a symptom of them not really understanding how to use it, for example. Or maybe they understand how to use the app, but you unknowingly left out a part of the process they need. And with the exclusion of that process, those businesses were still having to, supplement the app with a partially manual process. So while those are hypothetical examples, you can see where I'm going with this. Gather your feedback, but understand that simply having the feedback isn't enough. You'll need to do some digging to pinpoint the core problem. Think of it like this. Use the feedback you get just like a doctor uses a patient's symptoms to diagnose their illness. And then treat the illness itself to remove the symptoms altogether. And last, you want to close the feedback loop. Right? Once you've gotten the feedback, remember to close the loop. It sounds obvious, but a lot of founders go as far as getting the feedback, but then fail to close the loop and continue the cycle. When you're in beta testing or a widespread rollout phase, This can really hinder all the success you've worked so hard for up to that point. See, when users offer feedback, they want to be heard. But if they give their feedback and nothing happens, they won't feel heard. It's as simple as this. Just like you need to plan ahead on how you'll gather feedback, you need to plan ahead on how you'll implement it. If you gather the feedback but don't do anything with it, all your work will be for nothing. So remember, your feedback loops need to correlate with the specific problem your app is solving and with the specific phase of development you're in. Otherwise, you'll have a hard time actually using the feedback. And not only that, plan ahead. Use the feedback to help you diagnose deeper problems, and remember to close the loop. Feedback loops can and should apply to every phase of development, even in stages way down the road when you're making small tweaks to the app over time. Without feedback, you're just guessing and hoping for the best, right? But just like you should use hard data to help dictate which features your app should have in the first place, you should use feedback to determine what changes to make all along the way too. All right, I hope that helped you learn a new way to build your app more strategically and quickly. With the key points we went over, you should be able to implement feedback loops into each stage of development and move forward based on data and statistics versus guesswork. If you learned something new today, go ahead and click the subscribe button right below this video so you can stay updated on every new video released. And if you want to take this way further, head to coachingnocodeapps.com and sign up for our extended training series. It's completely free. Thanks for watching and see you in the next one.